Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that some stories and discussions in this episode of Radiant Resilience may touch on sensitive and potentially triggering topics. These may include themes of infertility, IVF procedures, medical treatments, financial stress, emotional trauma, impact on relationships, surgical procedures, detailed descriptions of the IVF process, mention of pregnancy loss and failed embryo transfers, mental health struggles, grief, and loss. Our goal is to share real-life experiences in a respectful and empathetic manner, offering insights into the complexities of the human spirit and the journey towards resilience. However, we understand that some content might be difficult for listeners. We encourage you to prioritize your well-being and discretion when deciding to listen. Please remember this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice or support. If you find yourself needing assistance, we urge you to seek help from qualified professionals or trusted support systems. Your mental and emotional health is important to us. Thank you for your courage and for joining us in a space of understanding and compassion. Hi friends, and welcome back to Radiant Resilience. I'm going to do things a little bit differently today. I'm going to do what A, everyone has been asking me to do, and B, I'm going to be brave like I'm asking everyone else to do. I have been having a lot of people ask me to do a solo episode on my fertility story. And while I really have no problem doing that and actually want to do that for you all, I realized how triggering and difficult this is. And I don't even know. Solo episodes are also just a little bit strange for me to talk by myself, and I hope that somebody listens at some point. But so bear with me on this. But I am so grateful, first of all. I'm going to back up a little bit. And I am so grateful for all of the amazing humans that have been brave enough to come on this podcast and share their stories with me, with everyone listening. I just am so grateful. And I can't even tell you how much it means to me that everybody has just done that. So I have decided that I am going to be brave also, like I'm asking everyone else to do, which I've realized is a difficult thing to do. I also want to preface this by saying that I am very much still in the midst of this story and still in the midst of this journey. And that also makes it hard because I am processing and healing from a lot right now. So it's been really hard for me to want to come on and rehash all of this stuff. But again, like I realized recently that I need to do this episode and I need to put it out because I am asking everyone else to do that with their story. And everyone has been so brave and inspiring and amazing. And yeah, I truly can't say enough how grateful I am for all of that. So I was trying to kind of make some notes before I started this on mostly just the chronological order of how everything happened and exactly what happened. So I'm going to go into that here in a little bit. And then I also want to talk about the feelings and everything I'm going through now because it's a very different story. So I'm not really sure where the best place is to start with this. As many of you know and have heard, and if you've listened to my podcast and you've sat in my chair in the salon or you've been my friend or a family member, most everybody knows that my husband and I have struggled with infertility. And excuse me, because I may cry during this episode. I've actually been feeling very triggered lately and very emotional lately. So all of that's, I'm sure, going to come up with this. But I always tell all my guests, like, crying is okay. It's okay. Let it out, so bear with me. We have been struggling with infertility for, about 8 or 9 years now. And it's been a long haul, a very long, very difficult haul. When I was younger, I just always thought I was going to get married and I was going to be a mom and I was going to have babies. And it never crossed my mind that something bad would happen. Or not bad, but just that it would be difficult, I guess, is a better way to put it. So, Colin and I have lived a very adventurous life, as many of you know. I don't know if many of you know this, but I met Colin my junior year of high school. He was a senior, and we met at a bowling alley for the first time. He was a basketball player, and I was a cheerleader, and we met after a basketball game. And one of my very good friends at the time, who was going to a different school, had come and watched the basketball game. They won that night, and I walked into the bowling alley, and my friend was talking to Colin and another one of his friends, both from the basketball team in high school. And I walked up, and my friend was like, "Oh, and this is Tawny. She cheers for you." And I was like so embarrassed because I was like, "What? Yeah, okay. I'm sure that they know that." Anyways, me and Colin chatted a little bit, and then I got a little bit curious about who he was, and I started asking around in high school, and I never heard a bad thing about this man in high school. That is super impressive. I decided to ask him to Sadie Hawkins dance, which I did. We decided to go on a date before that because we thought it might be weird that the dance was our first date. So we went on our first date before that, went to the Sadie Hawkins dance, went to prom together that year, kind of broke up because he was going to college and I was still going to be in high school. So we broke up, but we hung out all summer, and later that year we ended up back together, and the rest is history. So I have been with him for almost 20 years at this point in my life. We've been married for 10 and a half, almost 11, which is crazy to think about. When he graduated from CSU, we decided to go traveling. So we started off working a seasonal job in Alaska, and then we started backpacking all over the world. We did live in Australia for a year in that time frame, and then we started backpacking once or twice a year. And we've been pretty much doing that ever since. I remember having the conversations with him early on when we would make plans for the next trip and the next trip and the next year and everything. We would have those conversations, and I would say, "Well, when are we going to start a family? When are we going to start a family?" Oh, I should also say we got married when I was 26. Well, we got married in 2013. And I used to have those conversations with him of, "Well, when are we going to start a family? When are we going to start a family?" I wanted to start it sooner than he did, which I think is pretty common when it comes to men and women. And he's like, "Oh, we have time. It's fine." So I finally put the stipulation that I'm like, "Okay, I want to start this process at 30. And he was like, "Okay, that's good." We actually ended up starting it a little bit earlier than that. I wanted to try to go off of birth control and do a little bit more of the natural family planning instead of birth control. We had been on birth control for years. I mean, since I was in high school, probably a little over 10 years, we've been doing birth control. Sorry if this is a little personal, but when you're talking about fertility, it gets that way. Birth control and condoms for 10 years because we were just so cautious and so adamant about, not wanting kids for that time period. It was actually September of 2016 that I went off of birth control and I started doing the natural family planning of tracking my temperature and ovulation and all of that stuff. We did that for about a year and a half. Eventually, I decided to just stop the tracking and natural family planning stuff, and we were just like, okay, whatever happens, happens. About a year and a half after me going off of birth control, so March of 2018, I went into my OBGYN. We hadn't had any success. We had probably been super actively trying at that point for about 6 months, I would say, tracking ovulation and all the things. And no success. So I went into my OB and I was just like, "Hey, we've been actively trying for 6 months, but I've been off of birth control for a year and a half. can we just run some basic blood work and maybe a semen analysis? And she was like, yeah, absolutely. Since you've been off of birth control for a year and a half, like that kind of counts. So yeah, let's do that. So she ran my blood work and she sent us to a fertility doctor to run a semen analysis. And my husband's first semen analysis came back with 0% morphology. So for those of you who aren't familiar with this, they check three main categories. So they check the morphology, which is the shape of the sperm, the motility, which is how well the sperm swims, and the count of the sperm. So however many they have. So he was an overachiever in the count department and the motility department, but was an underachiever in the morphology department. And he had 0% on that semen analysis. Also, just for reference, for the motility and the morphology, they cannot possibly look at every single sperm in every single sample. There's too many of them. So they take like a smaller sample and they come up with an average based on that, basically. So they did not look at every single sperm in that semen analysis. Oh, all my blood work came back totally normal. And the fertility doctor who did the semen analysis basically just said, don't waste your time with IUIs, which is your turkey baster method. He said you should just move straight to IVF, which was extremely shocking. When I literally went to the doctor and was just like, can we just run some basic blood work and a semen analysis, and was totally convinced that everything was going to come back fine. We were just going to keep trying for a few more months and eventually it would happen. To go from that to you need to do IVF, which is the big guns, right? In vitro fertilization. And I was like, well, okay. And it made sense that if that was the issue, that was why we were also having trouble getting pregnant naturally, because the sperm was basically unable to penetrate the eggs. We were like, okay, we'll do IVF. And we were going to wait till later that year. Again, this was all in March, April of 2018. Later that year, we were going to do IVF. And a few months go by and Colin says to me, should I get a second opinion? And I was like, oh, I mean, sure, probably. So we end up at 2 other fertility clinics. Colin's rule of thumb, even for contracting work and stuff like that and quotes and bids, is always to get 3 quotes and bids or whatever. So we stuck with that theme. We went to 2 other fertility clinics. He had 2 more semen analyses run. They also ran blood work on me to double check everything. Again, all of my stuff came back normal. And actually those semen analyses of his came back normal. I think at this point, knowing what I know now, I think that was a one-off semen analysis. So that's kind of an interesting little fact, because every single one of his has come back normal since then. And every time they do an egg retrieval, which I'll get into this a little bit more here shortly, every time they do an egg retrieval, they do a semen analysis on the sperm because they want to make sure that everything's good. And they pick the best ones and all of that. So he's had many of those since then, and everything has always come back normal. And so I think that was a one-off one. But anyways, that's what led us into doing IVF. We decided to do IVF with the first clinic that we had gone to that had gotten the one-off semen analysis. I'm going to be fully transparent about this. Cost of this was a huge factor for us. We do not have health insurance that covers any fertility treatments whatsoever. I have been self-employed pretty much this entire time we've been going through this process. We owned a restaurant. Colin was basically self-employed as well. We have always provided our own health insurance, which is expensive and barely covers anything. And we both agreed that we did not want to go into debt paying for this process. That was very important to both of us. So we chose the more affordable clinic out of our options because we did not want to go into debt. And I know some people have judged me for that and probably still will judge me for that, because I think people think that if there's a higher price tag on something, that means it's better. I personally believe that the science is pretty much the same. I do believe that the embryologists and things like that make a difference in the outcome. However, I was very new to this world. As far as we knew, there was nothing blatantly wrong with either one of us, and we just wanted to have a baby. So I thought, going into my very first round of IVF, that this was going to solve all our problems and it was going to work and we were going to have a family and everything was going to be great, right? Okay, we have to do this IVF thing, whatever, no big deal. We decided to go with the first clinic, and I'm going to talk a little bit right now for those who are unfamiliar with the IVF process. I will go into that a little bit. It's kind of broken into two different processes, really, to make up IVF as a whole. I view them as two different processes a lot of the times because of my experience. But it starts with an egg retrieval. And what they do is they want to get as many eggs out of you as possible. When you have your normal monthly cycle, you ovulate one egg every month. Or two. Some people ovulate multiples, and that's how you end up with multiples and twins. But typically, you will ovulate one egg per month to try to get pregnant. And in an egg retrieval process, because the numbers get cut down significantly, also we'll get into that in a minute, they want to get as many out as they possibly can. I mean, some have said quality of the eggs is better over quantity, but also it depends, right? So they give you, you give yourself stimulation meds to overstimulate the ovaries so that they overproduce eggs, and then they try to control your cycle. They will give you a medication that prevents ovulation when you get to a certain point. So you start with the stimulation meds, and then they monitor you, see how fast or not fast your body is producing the eggs. And then they will start at some point the medication that stops ovulation. And then when your eggs are big enough and mature enough, based on what they see on an ultrasound and your blood work, then they give you a trigger shot, which triggers ovulation. And I believe it's 36 hours later after the trigger shot is when they predict you will ovulate. And that is when they predict that the eggs will all be ready to be taken out of you and ready for fertilization and all of that stuff. That's the first process. They take out the eggs and then they fertilize them immediately following taking them out. They give them about 24 hours where there's some type of chromosomal split that needs to happen to be considered successfully fertilized. Going over the numbers, they will take out a certain amount of eggs. Not all of those eggs will be mature enough to fertilize. They have to be mature in order to be fertilized. Then they will fertilize the mature eggs. Not all of those eggs will make it through fertilization and be considered successfully fertilized with that chromosomal split. Then you have your successfully fertilized now embryos. And they grow those embryos in a lab. And this is where it varies a ton. Sometimes they will grow them to 3 days. Sometimes they will grow them to 5, 6, or 7 days. And then they will either do a fresh transfer with those embryos or freeze the embryos. That is also when you can do genetic testing. If you do day 5, 6, or 7, if you do day 3 embryos, they cannot do the genetic testing on those. So if you choose to do genetic testing, you would do that on day 5, 6, or 7 embryos. And then if you freeze them, you will at a later date do a embryo transfer of those. And they like to freeze them at a certain stage of a blastocyst, which is what usually happens on day 5 if it was in your body as well. Anyways, I know that's a lot of information, so I hope you're following me on that. You ideally want as many blastocysts, day 5 embryos, as possible. I say that from my experience. I guess if you're somebody that has ended up with a ton of embryos at the end of every egg retrieval, you don't want as many as possible because that also creates a little bit of a difficult decision-making process down the road if you're not going to use all of those embryos. And anyways, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. I just wanted to give a brief overview of the different processes. So that is the first half, okay? That is the egg retrieval portion. Then you can choose to do a fresh transfer, or depending on a few things, but there is a fresh transfer where right after your egg retrieval, you start transfer meds, which is going to be like your estrogen, progesterone, all that stuff. And then they would do a fresh transfer on day 3 or day 5 or whatever, where they put the embryo inside your body, hope for implantation, and then 2 weeks later, they do a blood test to confirm or deny that you are pregnant. Or there is also a frozen transfer. So if you freeze those embryos, then at a later date, you start a transfer process. So you start the transfer meds, which build up the lining of your uterus to make it nice and thick and comfy. Then you start progesterone, which locks in the lining of your uterus and also helps with implantation and stuff. And then, depending on how old that embryo is, day 3, day 5, whatever, they will put that embryo or multiple embryos into your uterus, and that is the embryo transfer. And again, you wait 2 weeks where you continue all the meds and everything, 2 weeks for that pregnancy test, the equivalent to your 2-week wait if you ever had to track all of that. You're pretty familiar with the 2-week wait, which would be when you would like pee on a stick for a pregnancy test, okay? So those are the processes of IVF. I did my very first egg retrieval in November, December of 2018. And I'm going to see, I was going to give you some stats of some of these. I won't give you all of them because that's just exhausting and we're not here to talk about stats, but my stats for my first egg retrieval. My first egg retrieval, November, December, the actual egg retrieval was December. I started the meds in November. And in December, they took out 19 eggs is what they took out of my ovaries. 17 of those were mature. 11 of them successfully fertilized. And we ended up, of those 11, with 2 blastocyst day 6 embryos. We chose to do genetic testing that round. We sent our 2 embryos to genetic testing and waited for those results to come back. And I vividly remember getting the phone call about how many blastocysts we had and how many embryos had been sent to genetic testing. I was so hopeful, starting with 19 eggs, even dropping to 11 fertilized eggs, 11 embryos essentially at that point. I was so excited. I was like, yes, we're doing this. This is happening. Everything's going well. The numbers look good. When I got that phone call, that we were down to 2 embryos that we had sent to genetic testing, my heart sank. And I was like, oh, okay, only 2. It was just very disappointing. And I think that was the first time that I had experienced the loss and the grief in this process. Now, obviously, some stronger loss and grief comes into play down the road, but that was really tough. It was really tough because I just had gone into this. I was like, yes, IVF is going to solve all my problems. It's going to go great. We had a great egg retrieval. We had a great fertilization rate. Everything was great. And I vividly remember also New Year's that year, we were still waiting for the results of our tested embryos. It takes a few weeks to get those results. They did freeze the embryos at that point, and we were out for New Year's, and Colin said to me, what happens if neither of those embryos come back viable? And my instant response was, well, we just do this again. We just do it again. We just keep doing this until we have success. That was my attitude. That was my response at the time. We just keep doing this. So he was like, oh, okay, we need to talk about that. Like, this is expensive. It was a lot. It was a lot on your body. But okay, I guess we'll just see how the embryos come back. So of that batch, we ended up with 1 embryo that was viable. And, well, actually, 1 that was not viable and 1 that was inconclusive. Based on that, our doctor said, I recommend doing another egg retrieval, basically banking embryos. He was like, there's about a 50-50 chance that embryo would miscarry. let's go ahead and do another egg retrieval and see if we can get a few more embryos. So I was like, okay, great. And then he said, if we did the genetic testing again, we can resend this embryo to the lab to retest it to try to get a more conclusive result. You know, we're paying for all of this ourselves, so we had to give it time before we could afford to do another round. And also we both kind of wanted a break. I had been through a lot physically with the meds and everything, because when your ovaries are producing eggs that much, they get heavy, okay? And what they do is they start to sag down next to your uterus, and that's actually how they go in and take them out. They go in with basically a vaginal ultrasound wand with a needle on the end that pokes out the side of your uterus, and they take each egg out one at a time, actually. They want your ovaries to get heavy and kind of hang down, but it's literally the most uncomfortable thing I have ever experienced. It's painful. I couldn't wear jeans during that process. Like, as we got closer to egg retrieval, it was just so uncomfortable. So August of 2019, we did our second egg retrieval to try to get more embryos. We also changed up the medications a bit. They actually put me on human growth hormone at that point, testosterone gel, and some estrogen prior to starting the stimulation meds. And this was supposed to improve my egg quality in hopes of getting a better result. We did in September of 2019, I did my second egg retrieval. And this one was a bit disappointing because they got 9 eggs out. And after getting 19 the first time, I was quite devastated that they got 9 because of how much the numbers cut down last time. I really wanted a higher number again. So we got 9 collected. 5 of those 9 successfully fertilized. And after genetic testing, we ended up with 1 embryo from that round. That embryo from that round came back as a mosaic, which just means it has a combo of normal and abnormal cells. And we retested the one from the first egg retrieval, and that one was normal, a totally normal embryo. In this process of this second egg retrieval, they had discovered that I had a fibroid that was pushing on the lining of my uterus. And fibroids are not normally that big of an issue, but this one was literally like, for those who are watching the video, you can see it was protruding on the inside of my uterus. So the lining was sticking out like this. And for those who are just listening, I hope that makes sense. So basically it was causing an abnormality in the lining of my uterus, which makes it more difficult for implantation. An embryo is not going to attach to the lining of your uterus unless it's totally smooth and normal. So they decided I needed to have surgery to remove that fibroid before I can do an embryo transfer. At this point in time, I had 2 embryos frozen that I could try, and decided to, in November of 2019, to have the fibroid removed. I went to an OBGYN for that. It would have been just way more expensive at the fertility clinic, but my insurance covered it through an OBGYN. I had the first fibroid surgery November 2019, and he ended up not getting all of it. The fertility clinic looks again in preparation for the embryo transfer, and it's still causing an issue. I don't know if it grew, came back, he didn't get enough, whatever. In March of 2020, I had to have surgery again on that same fibroid, and he went a little bit more aggressive, but the guy, God bless this OBGYN, he really just wanted to not cause any scar tissue in my uterus lining either, because that could cause more issues of fertility as well. So he was being very cautious, but unfortunately we had to do it twice. March of 2020, before the entire world shut down, I had fibroid surgery number 2. Oh, and prior to that, in December, I did an ERA, which is basically a biopsy of the lining of your uterus to see when your lining is the most receptive to accept an embryo. Gosh, I hope you're all following me on this, because I know this is a lot of information, but this is my story. And I feel like all of these details are important because it really goes to show how much I've actually gone through. It's not just, oh, I did IVF, or, oh, I did a couple rounds of IVF. This was over the course of many years and a very, very traumatizing experience. So did the ERA in December, did the second fibroid surgery in March of 2020. COVID happened, which was, a whole thing in itself. And in June of 2020, we decided to do our first frozen embryo transfer. I started all the meds. We did the transfer, looks like, June 9th of 2020. And 2 weeks later, I did a blood test that showed it was completely negative. Did not implant at all. Fully unsuccessful transfer. That was my first normal embryo from the first egg retrieval. Then in August of 2020, did it all again, did another frozen embryo transfer, and we changed medications up a little bit. I did an HCG wash in my uterus where they just shoot HCG in there in hopes that it helps with implantation. I did intralipid infusions, whole other thing. And we transferred August 11th of 2020, our mosaic embryo, our last and final embryo of that round. Did a whole bunch of immune suppressant and anti-inflammatory protocol for that one. I actually got a positive blood test from that 2 weeks later, but it was very low. Then they test you again 2 days later in hopes that it doubles, and mine only went up 1 point. Then 2 days after that, it went down to 12. So it was originally 26, went up to 27, and went down to 12. They basically considered it a failed transfer. And there we were looking at square one again. I no longer had embryos frozen. I'd done 2 egg retrievals, 2 embryo transfers, and we had to have some serious conversations. But I still had it in me at the time to keep going. And I decided at that time that I was going to try a laparoscopy surgery to look for endometriosis, adenomyosis, fibroids, all the things, basically like an exploratory surgery. That last embryo transfer was August of 2020. So we're fast forwarding now to May of 2021, where I had my laparoscopy surgery. I sought out a specialist who does what they call excision surgery, which is, they're just very, very, very good at this surgery. So I had that surgery done. They found a mild amount of endometriosis. They said no adenomyosis. I had a little bit of tissue up in my right tube, but he said he couldn't get to it to remove it. And then he removed 6 fibroids. So apparently I have a massive fibroid problem. Just since he was in there, he was like, okay, I'll take all these out. So that was that. Everything had been cleaned out, all good to go. And Colin and I had a conversation about doing IVF overseas. Many of you know we are big travelers and we've been to many, many countries. I had heard a lot about people doing IVF in different countries. I was a little bit skeptical about it, but I did a ton of research. And I had seen an Instagram post way early on in my IVF journey of Turkey being the number one most affordable place to get IVF done. And so that always kind of stuck in my head. I was like, well, that would be kind of fun. You could do like a vacation and do the IVF. We decided we were going to do that. September and October of 2021, we went to Turkey and we did about 6 weeks, I believe, 5 or 6 weeks of just traveling around Turkey, did a huge vacation. And I started meds while we were traveling around Turkey. And then we went and finished up in Istanbul. I did a egg retrieval process and we also did a fresh transfer. But they had told me that my progesterone levels after the egg retrieval were high. And so the chances of this fresh transfer working were not going to be very great. So we did the fresh transfer and I can't remember if we did 1 or 2 embryos at that time, but then we ended up with 2 frozen embryos after that. 2 really good blastocyst frozen embryos. A few weeks later, I did a pregnancy test and it was negative. So I stopped all meds, was like, okay, now we need to plan for an embryo transfer in Turkey for me to go do this frozen one. However, Colin is not needed for that part. His most important role is for the egg retrieval, for fertilization. I decided to go by myself in April of 2022. I had done the 2 frozen embryo transfers here in Colorado, did the fresh transfer in Turkey following the egg retrieval, and this was my 4th embryo transfer. They decided to transfer both embryos. I didn't really love that because I didn't really want a Hail Mary. But that's what the doctor recommended, so I rolled with it. I came home, and a couple weeks later, I took a pregnancy test, and I actually got a positive pregnancy test. It's the only positive pregnancy test that I have ever gotten. Oh gosh, so many feelings, but it was very, very faint on the pregnancy test, but it was there. I still have a picture of it. There was definitely a line there. The doctor said to wait 2 more days, test again. I did that. And it started getting lighter and lighter. So he said, it's probably not viable. So go ahead and stop all your meds. So here we are again for the 2nd or 3rd time. I am back to square one. No more embryos. Not ready to give this process up. I talked to Colin about doing another round in Turkey. In October of 2022, we went back for our 4th egg retrieval and did the egg retrieval. I don't remember what the numbers were at this point, but we transferred 3 embryos fresh, and I believe we did day 4 embryos, and then waited for the results of the rest of the embryos and got the results that we had no frozen embryos. Once again, this was our 4th egg retrieval, and we were facing if that transfer, which was the, 5th embryo transfer, did not work, we were back to square one again. Please excuse my French, fucking square one again. And it did not take. I got a negative pregnancy test. I actually went and did a blood test that time. Totally negative, no sign of a positive. This was the end of 2022. At the beginning of 2023, Colin and I went to Guatemala and Honduras for 8 weeks. And in that time, I was healing from all of this. And I said, I want to give it one more Hail Mary, give it all we got, try in Colorado. He agreed, a little bit of reluctance, because at this point, I mean, we had been through so much. I'm talking about all of this statistically and just very, this is the process, this is what happened, but you have to understand that through all of this, the emotions were debilitating. It took a toll on our bank account. It took a toll on our marriage. We had several fights. There was one in particular I remember that I thought was going to be the end of my marriage. Thank God it was not. I was being re-traumatized and re-put through grief over and over and over because every single one of those embryos was a possibility for a baby. And although I never ended up pregnant, I never had any miscarriages, those were our chances. One of those, I was convinced, one of those was going to be our miracle baby. So, I've talked about this all the time, and now I'm at a loss for words for how to even describe the feelings and what we went through to that point. But I was feeling really good about going into the Hail Mary, we can do this. I had made friends with one of the nurses at my clinic here in Colorado, and she was telling me all the things they could do differently and what she thought we should do, she thought we should try. She's like, I think we can get you pregnant. I was like, okay, cool. So I convinced Colin, who was very reluctant for very, very good reason. I mean, for fuck's sakes, we're talking, at this point it had been, like I said, 4 egg retrievals, 5 embryo transfers. I had had 3 surgeries in that time frame, all the meds, all the cost of all of that. It's a lot. It was a lot. And we were doing things too. I'm sure some of you have heard me mention this in other podcasts, but we were doing the thing where it was like, okay, we're making our travel plans for the year. And then I'm like, but what if I'm pregnant? Then I can't go scuba diving. I can't drink. I can't, like, that was limiting. We were changing our travel plans and what we wanted to do based on this process. Or he would be like, okay, in August, let's go to this place. And I'd be like, oh, but I really wanted to do an egg retrieval that month. And he'd be like, okay, cool. So it was controlling our lives. And to be fair, from, the time that we started actively trying in about 2017 to this point, it had literally consumed my life. It was in my thoughts every day. I was tracking my cycles all the time. Every single month that I got my period was a letdown. I got super hopeful during ovulation every month because, keep in mind, through all of this, I became very in tune with my body. Very, very in tune with my body. I knew the windows that I ovulated. I knew what it felt like. I knew when my period was coming. I knew all the things. Every single month was a letdown that it didn't happen. I got my hopes up. And anybody out there who was listening that has tried to get pregnant for even just a few months understands this. It is devastating to get that negative or get your period. And I had been through it over and over and over for years. And then modern science wasn't even able to help me. And that was devastating. And I had spent all this time and all this money on all of this stuff and had no success. Anyways, so 2023, we get back from our trip in March. I started doing a whole bunch of preliminary meds in, I think, April, May-ish time. One of the things they decided to do with me this time was to put me on an antimicrobial protocol, I believe it's called. So I was on 5 or 6 antibiotics to kill any type of infection that could possibly be in my uterus. In that time, I got thrush, which is a yeast infection on your tongue. Most disgusting thing I have ever experienced in my life. So gross. The buildup on my tongue, it was brown. It felt weird. It was really, really gross. Terrible. That was from those antibiotics. Then I did a whole bunch. I did all of the things. I did all of the antihistamine protocol. I did the anti-inflammatory protocol. I did the immune suppressant therapy protocol. I was doing IVIG. I was doing intralipid. I was doing all of the things, okay? So I had my egg retrieval. I believe it was in June of 2023. We had very, very good results. We decided to freeze on day 3 this time because, as you remember, we ended up with very few embryos on day 5 every single time. We lost the majority of our embryos on day 3 or day 5, day 3 or day 4. They just stopped progressing and were no longer viable. So I decided to freeze on day 3. We froze 5 embryos on day 3. They decided my body post egg retrieval was not ready to do a fresh transfer, which I was okay with because that had happened in the past and I didn't want to waste any embryos. So we decided to freeze them all. I went immediately into a transfers. In July of 2023, we transferred 1 embryo, came back completely unsuccessful. In August of 2023, we transferred 2 embryos, was completely unsuccessful. I needed a break at that point. I had literally been going from, I guess, April or May until August at that point of meds and nonstop treatments and nonstop doctor's appointments. Also in that time, one of the immune suppressant meds that they put me on gave me the shingles. So then I'm dealing with the shingles, okay? That was the most painful, horrible, awful thing that I had ever experienced in my life. Also, the shingles were happening around the time that I was due to go in for my blood test to confirm or deny that transfer. They wouldn't see me at the fertility clinic. And what doctor's office is going to see me for blood work when I have shingles running up my arms? I kept it a secret and wrapped my arm up and went to a LabCorp, which also was just a nightmare. Anytime I had to do blood work outside of the clinic was a nightmare. Every single time. Then you also don't get the rush results like you would at the clinic, and it's a whole thing. It was a very, very emotional time period. I was very upset that I had the shingles. I was in a lot of pain. I was very nervous about the transfer. Anyways, August, second transfer comes back negative, and I needed a break. In November, we transferred our last 2 embryos, which also both came back negative. I am out of embryos currently. I am exhausted mentally, physically, emotionally, energetically, financially, fucking exhausted. Tired of my heart being broken over and over and over. Tired of spending the money on something that isn't working. I'm tired. So tired. It's been a lot. And also in this time frame, the amount of people in my life who have had babies and gone on to have success. I've made friends through this process who were also doing IVF that had success. A few of them decided to quit talking to me altogether, which was really frustrating, but I also understand they probably just didn't know what to do or what to say or how to behave. It is incredibly heartbreaking to watch everyone around you get the thing that you so desperately want and have so desperately worked your fucking ass off for. And I'm not blaming anyone. It is not anyone else's fault. I am not upset with anyone. I just want to make that clear right now. I am not upset with anyone who has gotten pregnant. I am not upset with anyone who has children. I'm not mad at any of those people. That is not the emotions that are going through me right now. It is the emotions of the heartbreak of my own situation. And I guess full transparency, yes, there is a ton of jealousy there. I'm not going to lie about that either. And I'm not going to feel shame about that because it's been fucking hard. And I've been through a lot. My body's been through. I mean, I just can't say it enough. It's hard. And I have literally had to go through it over and over and over and relive that grief over and over. And let me explain something too. It's not just the grief over not being able to have a family or a baby. It is literally a lifetime of grief. I am grieving the life that I thought that I would have, which is crazy as I'm going through it. Not something I ever thought I would have to go through. Of course, a lot of other people go through that. People who are experiencing divorce, someone passing. I understand that that comes up in a lot of different scenarios as well. I was in a friend's wedding back in October, and I was heavily triggered at the wedding by watching the groom dance with his mother, because I looked at that and thought, I don't know if that's something I'm ever going to get to do, is dance with my son or daughter at their wedding. I'm never going to get to experience the firsts, the first steps, the first everything's. My kids playing sports. I'm never going to, it's just overwhelming. Also, something we've been talking about recently is making a will or a trust, because we have some rental properties and things like that. And I don't know who I'm supposed to give those things to. I always thought I would have kids to pass those things on to. So it comes up in a lot. The possibility of even having grandkids is now not a possibility. So it's a continuous process of processing. Sorry about the repetitiveness. Right now, where I'm at, I don't know where I'm at, to be honest with you. I'm not pursuing treatment anymore. I have decided to walk away from treatment. Every once in a while, I get a little bug that's like, oh, maybe I could do that one more time. Maybe that would be our magic time. Maybe, and then I look back on the past year and 8 years, and I'm like, no, fuck that. I can't. My heart cannot take it anymore. So I am done with fertility treatments at this point in time. I will not be doing any more IVF. I am not going to pursue donors for eggs or sperm or embryos. I am not going to pursue surrogacy. I have a post on my Instagram, if you go back and look, that talks about the average cost of all of those options. I have probably spent close to $100,000 on this process in the last 8 years with everything combined. I just can't spend the money anymore. I don't want to. Also, if I were to go the surrogacy route, I would need to make embryos again. So that's a whole thing too. That would be going through IVF again. Adoption has not been completely ruled out. However, that is not an easy, simple solution either. I know there are a lot of people out there that have asked me or my family members or friends, well, why don't they just adopt? It is not cheap. It is not easy. It is quite the process. And I could probably do an entire podcast on adoption stories that I have that were very, very difficult. I know there's great stories out there and they're wonderful and I could be one of them. I understand that. But at this point in my life, it is not something I am pursuing, but have not completely ruled it out. I also feel like there is no time frame on that. If I decide I want to adopt in 5 years, I can adopt in 5 years. But I'm in a very, very unique position because I don't know the statistics on how many people have gone through IVF and not had success, or have walked away before they had success or whatever. I don't know the statistics on that. I would be willing to bet that they're very low in regards to that it does not happen very often, or people just eventually end up adopting. I feel like I'm being judged. And I could be making this all up in my head, but I feel like there are people that think that I don't want it bad enough because I haven't done the adoption and done everything and anything and everything possible that I can do in my power. But let me tell you, I wanted this desperately. And I did all the things. I tried my absolute hardest to the best of my ability of all the things. And I cannot keep doing it. I don't know. Like I said, every once in a while, my brain goes to, oh, well, maybe if I go try this therapy, it'll work. Maybe if I go see a naturopath, they'll be able to get me pregnant. Maybe Colin could go to a urologist and we could really, really dive deep into that. And maybe we could get pregnant from that. But honestly, like I said before, it has consumed me for 8 years of my life. Consumed me. All of my thoughts. And like, I'm tired. And I really hope that nobody judges or faults me for that, because unless you've walked in my shoes, you won't understand. But it's very, very tough, this journey. And I feel very alone. I feel very isolated. I don't know anyone in my world who has been through what I've been through and has nothing to show for it. It's a very lonely process. I have a wonderful life. I understand that. I have a wonderful husband. We have a wonderful, amazing life together. I probably sound like a broken record player, but I just want to make clear where I stand right now and be transparent about my feelings and the process. And like I said, I'm very, very much in the midst of this entire thing. And it's very, very, very hard. I think this is where I'm going to end it for now. Hope that was kind of what you guys were looking for. If you were looking for my story, it's real, it's raw, it's honest, it sucks. It really sucks. And I don't know what the future holds. Right now, I'm just trying to heal. I'm just trying to heal my heart, my soul. And I don't know. We will see what the next year or two brings. Colin and I don't really talk about it right now because I think we're both trying to heal from it, and there's no sense in opening, the old wounds. We're just trying to live our best lives right now. At the time of this recording, I have a ton of stuff going on this year with travel, friends coming to visit, and I'm just keeping myself busy doing the things that I love. And I recently had a conversation with somebody who relates to my situation, who she suggested that I try to find things that I love to do. Try some new hobbies, try some new things. I think I'm going to try to do that. Do a little self-discovery, see how I feel, and we'll see what happens. And yeah, so that's my story. Sorry if it was a downer, but it's the honest truth. Thank you for listening. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. And if you have any questions or thoughts or anything on my story or want to clarify some things, please feel free to send me a message on Instagram, or if you look in the show notes, my email for this podcast is there. Feel free. Or if you're somebody that's going through it and you want love and support, please feel free to reach out to me as well. I feel for anybody going through it. Also, if you're about to embark on IVF, or you know somebody that's about to embark on IVF and would like some love and support and whatever, or want to know more about the process because they're unsure, please send them my way, because I am very, very, very game to help people through that process. Because I know when I first started going into it, I didn't understand exactly what it all entailed. So it's really nice to talk to people that have been through it if you're just getting ready to go that route. I'm going to end here finally. Again, thank you for listening. Feel free to comment, email, whatever you would like. If you have questions, if I wasn't clear on something, please let me know. I just hope that this episode enlightens people out there who know somebody going through it, or if it brings on some more compassion in you towards the process. If you don't understand it, it's very, very hard. I know I've said it a million times in here, but it truly is. Or if you're somebody that's going through it, I hear you, I see you, you're not alone. And I don't know if there's anything else I have to say at the end of this, so I will see you all on the next episode. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and found value in the stories shared, please consider following us on your preferred podcast platform. Your ratings and reviews make a huge difference. They help us reach more listeners and continue bringing you engaging, insightful content. We appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Until next time, keep listening, growing, and sharing.